For 3 days every week over about 18 months, as we moved in and out of the COVID restrictions of 2020 and 2021, I would put on a black cassock, a face mask and a lanyard and walk laps round and round the inside of Ripon Cathedral. Now, there was a reason for this. I wasn't just keeping warm or getting up my step count. I was there because they needed chaplains. I was there, I guess, to notice people. And in COVID, many people of all faiths and none came through the cathedral doors to be noticed. People who were lonely, scared or sad, who wanted to be listened to, and sometimes to be prayed for. One morning, a smart-looking man in his early 60s sat himself next to a sheltering pillar, and whilst he'd dropped his head into his hands, it didn't look as if he was praying. Something was up. So I prayed a rapid prayer for the right words and walked over to find out as gently as I could what he was doing there. He was local, he told me, but had never been in here before. He was an engineer for an international firm that built skyscrapers and bridges, and he'd recently retired. Very quickly, he told me he wasn't religious, he was a scientist, but he used to go to church as a child. He'd not been since. Yesterday, however, he had learned that his wife, who was ill in hospital, needed an urgent operation. And because of the COVID restrictions, he couldn't be there with her. It wouldn't be until the evening that he'd know how she'd gone on, evenings being when the hospital staff rang round all the anxious relatives. It was going to be a very long day. So he'd taken himself off to the gardens at Harlow Carr to take his mind off things, but when he got there, it hadn't seemed like the right place. And he'd driven on towards Ripon, but there was no solace to be found walking by the canal either. Nor could he bear to see the cheerful couples chatting at the outdoor cafe in the market square. None of the places he'd expected to find some respite felt right. But this place was open. And so rather surprisingly and a bit reluctantly, he allowed himself to sit in the deep and hallowed silence of an almost empty ancient church. Then, having told me of his life and his day, in the silence, he began to cry. Today we heard the story of Elijah, who, as Old Testament figures go, was a truly magnificent prophet. Immediately before this story, Elijah had probably done the most spectacular prophet-y thing ever. So crazed, so weird. He'd pitted God against the worshippers of a local deity, Baal, whom the Israelites had defected to under the influence of Queen Jezebel. It was a time of drought, a bit like now, and since Baal was, amongst other things, a god of rain, you can see their logic. For Elijah, however, this change of allegiance was calamitous, prolonging the drought, and to restore his people's faith, he had 2 huge sacrificial pyres built, one to Baal, one to God, and the challenge was to see which god would light the pyre first. And so if hundreds of Baal's devotees get involved in various gruesome and violent activities to call down Baal and light the fire, Elijah stands mocking them, even soaking his own pyre with water as he prays. And in response to Elijah, God burns not only the wood, but the ground beneath it. Elijah drives the prophets of Baal away to their deaths, and shortly afterwards, rain clouds form and heavy rain falls. It's a story that's almost cliched in its gory, triumphant, Old Testament style. It's the stuff of grand opera or Marvel films. So you might imagine that after this, Elijah would be on a total high. It's an epic display of his faith and God's powers. But that doesn't seem to be the case for him at all. In fact, the writer paints a very different picture. The Elijah we meet in today's reading seems to have experienced a sudden, and dramatic loss of confidence and purpose. He's fearful and confused by Queen Jezebel. He's utterly despondent and depressed. Take my life, Lord. I have had enough. I'm no better than my ancestors. Elijah feels lost, worthless, and useless, not a superhero prophet, but a lonely man. Perhaps it's exhaustion, perhaps it's fear, perhaps it's an inevitable low after such a wild and violent high. But Elijah is neither buoyed up by his success nor crowing over his achievements. Instead, Elijah drifts out into the wilderness, and the sparse shelter of bushes doesn't feel right. And eventually, he finds himself drawn to a place of shelter on the Mount of Horeb, a place where years before Moses met with God, an ancient liminal place, a holy place, where foundational laws, traditions, and commandments were given, shaping the faith that saturated Elijah in his childhood. And it's in the ancient holy place that God gently asks Elijah, "What are you doing here?" Elijah replies, not describing only his recent triumphs, "I have been very zealous," but also his fears and his loneliness. "And now I'm the only one left," he says, "and they're trying to kill me." In response, Elijah is told to wait for God to pass by. And as he waits, the earth shakes, the wind howls, the fires burn, and yet in none of these powerful movements of the elements where Elijah might have wanted to experience God's presence, is God to be found. God comes instead to Elijah in the sound of sheer silence, sometimes translated as a still, small voice. The Hebrew apparently works with either. And Elijah finds solace. God relieves his fears, renews hope, and restores his confidence. God gives him new tasks, a new purpose to fulfill, and new strength to continue where he'd given up. So returning then to 2021 and the engineer who had found himself drawn to a holy and liminal space of an ancient cathedral, at a point where he was at his lowest place and discovering solace in the silence. The numinous atmosphere stirred in him an almost forgotten sense of faith and holiness, allowing him to share his stories and his tears in such a way that he regained the strength he needed to drive home and wait for that phone call. I felt God was with us that day. And I know, because he actually wrote to the cathedral, that he felt the same. I also know that the operation went well. His wife recovered. There was a happy ending. So whilst God met Elijah and the engineer in a physical, hallowed place, which they had maybe deliberately, maybe subconsciously sought out, God also chose to meet them by reminding them of a place in time too. A recollection of a time where faith felt real, a childhood faith, a faith of generations that had gone before. Baptism marks a moment in time where faith is felt, declared, enacted, a liminal holy moment, if you like. And it is a place we can choose to step back into at any point in our lives, particularly perhaps when times are hard, when we face troubles or doubts or feel lonely or a lack of belonging. We can remember that we or someone on our behalf joyfully declared a commitment of a life of love, to an adoption into Christ's family, to sharing together with God the task of bringing peace and hope to a world that really does need us today to reject evil and turn towards grace and humility of Jesus instead. I say this because later today we will be baptizing little George here in church. And he's just a wee tot. He doesn't understand the significance. But that doesn't matter. I don't think it's an experience we can fully articulate or explain anyway. Love, can it even be explained? but even the tiniest of humans can experience it. And George will come here because he is loved and known by his family and friends and by God. His baptism is a precise moment in time when we declare this for him. In a way, it's a bit like my dad losing his watch when he was sailing, because he lost it, but he knows exactly where it is. As he leant over the rails to pick up a mooring on the Isle of Rum, his watch slid off over the side of the boat. Well, the boat has GPS. The watch has coordinates. My dad can see its position on an app, waiting silently on the seabed. It's lost, but he knows exactly where it is. He could return and retrieve it one day. So we will pray that George will grow up with a strong faith, living securely in a knowledge that he's adored by a God who will never leave him. But as it's clear from Elijah's story, even the most faith-filled people experience doubt and times when they just don't know what the point is anymore. That's when the lost watch of our baptism needs retrieving. That's when that day of baptism, filled with joy and love and new beginnings, becomes a place of returning and rest and solace. I hope that everyone finds a place of solace where we are comforted and restored by God, be it on a mountain wilderness, an ancient holy site, or cocooned in a cave. Or in recalling, just as we will do for George here today later, that there was a time in our life, when our little life was celebrated, when we were committed to God in an act of faith and trust, that prayers were said and prayers promised for us, a light lit for us, a blessing spoken over us, that we were anointed as a beloved child of God, and that somehow in the waters of baptism, God met us, and God will always seek to meet us again and again and again. Amen.